Let's open our Bibles today to Acts chapter 1. Acts chapter 1, and we're continuing just talking about some of those topics that we just want to talk about once a year and think about at least once a year. Things that all of us face, things that are necessary, things we want to know how to do. So we're trying to be very practical in this little series as we prepare. We're going to start Philippians soon, unless the Lord returns. But for this week, what I wanted to do was talk about how to pray for people in our church. How to pray for people in our church. And here's the method of how we're going to determine this and look at this week. What we're going to do is first look at a narrative. And remember, narrative is just kind of retelling a story, how something went. And when you retell a story, you're emphasizing that which is important. You're not giving every detail. And so what we're going to do is look at a narrative. We're going to see the pattern of the early church. And then we're going to look at epistles. Epistles are letters that were written to churches that contain direct commands of God to the church. So you can always be sure that if you find something in a narrative, a pattern, and then it's commanded in an epistle directly to the church, you can be sure that that is something the church ought to do. Now, if you find something in a narrative that has happened maybe once or twice, and then you don't see it ever talked about again or ever commanded again, you can understand, well, this event might have been incidental. You know, it might not be exactly what we are to reproduce in every age of God's people. So what we're going to look at is the narrative of the book of Acts, because that's all about the church. And we're going to look at what they pray for. You know, when I look at the Bible, I am extremely convicted about what I pray for people. It's amazing the distance between what I pray for people and what people the Bible pray for people sometimes. You know, I since I was a little kid, do you pray this prayer? I'll pray, Lord, give us a good day. And I really just don't really see that in the Bible anywhere. Lord, give us a good day. You know, but I pray it all the time. It's like I can't come up with anything else. Well, today we're going to look at how do people in the New Testament pray, and how did Paul command us to pray in the epistles, and what kind of example did he give in his prayers? So let's go to Acts chapter 1 and look at verse 14. And let me just back up to verse 12 so you can kind of get the context of what's going on here. In Acts chapter 1, verse 14. You find people here devoted to prayer. Verse 12, it says, "Then they returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day journey. And when they had entered, they went into the upper room where they were staying, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas the son of James. These all continued with one accord in prayer and supplication with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers." Okay. So we find that these ones are continuing in one accord in prayer. That word continuing means that they're devoted to prayer. So that's what I have if you have your notes with you there. They're devoted to prayer. And you'll see this phrase throughout the book of Acts, that they continue in certain things. They continue in those things that Christ had taught them. These are the apostles. This is just after Jesus has ascended into heaven. And right now, the church isn't even formed yet. So you have apostles continuing in what Jesus had already started. That was the work of prayer. So they're devoted to prayer. Now go to chapter 2, verses 42. At verse 42, you'll see a pattern established, because here it says, "And they continued," or they were devoted to, "the apostles' doctrine, fellowship, the breaking of bread, and prayers." So they are devoted to praying. They're continuing in this prayer that they had started. By the time we get to Acts chapter 2, we find that now the church has formed, because the church starts in Acts chapter 2. That's a good, one of those passages you should just tuck away in the back of your head, especially if you want to be ordained like a pastor, at least in our fellowship. When did the church start? Acts chapter 2, right? When did the church start? Acts chapter 2. When did the church start? Acts chapter 2. So let's just drill it into our heads. The church starts in Acts 2. It doesn't start with John the Baptist, and it doesn't start later on in the book of Acts. We believe it starts in Acts chapter 2. So now the church has started, and they're continuing in prayer. They're devoted to prayer. They find that devotion to prayer is something necessary. We'll now go over to Acts chapter 6, verse 4. And I'm sorry we're flipping around so much today. I like to stick in one passage, but right now we're just trying to see patterns. Because in a narrative, the point is to see a pattern and then apply that pattern to a church. Acts chapter 6, verse 4, it says this. Here's the apostles speaking, and they say, "But we will give ourselves continually," or we will devote ourselves to prayer and ministry of the word. So here we find that those apostles, when they're acting as elders or pastors in the church, they find it necessary to devote themselves to prayer, that needs to be part of their occupation. So then they seek men out of good reputation and find deacons to help take care of some of the physical needs of the church. It's interesting, I mentioned Acts chapter 1, verse 14. When you had those people gathering together and continuing or devoting themselves to prayer, the thing that they were praying about was to choose another apostle. And if you remember, they needed to replace Judas because Judas had betrayed all of them and betrayed our Lord. So what they do is they gather together, they pray, and you know how they choose the next apostle? They cast lots. Okay? Casting lots is, we kind of do it this way. We'll draw straws. They probably had kind of dice type of things. It's before the church had started, so dice were allowed at that time. So they're casting lots. Now, I make a joke that it's before the church starts, but you actually discern a pattern in Acts that's kind of neat. Acts chapter 1, before the church starts, they cast lots, the Lord shows them. And you find in the book of Proverbs, I didn't write it down, but it says that the lot is controlled by the sovereign Lord. God is the one directing that. We find in Acts chapter 6, when they need to seek out and find deacons, that again they pray, but you know what they do to select the deacon? It says they find out what pleases the multitude. So they ask the multitude who the deacon should be. Now, how would you figure out what a multitude wants? Well, I would say voting, but maybe it's just because I'm an American and it's the 4th of July. But it's not, because you go to Acts chapter 14, 23, and once again, they're there selecting, Barnabas and Paul are helping select elders for the churches. Now, our New King James Version, I believe it says that they appointed elders in every town after they had prayed. But the Greek word for that means literally to stretch your hand up and raise your hand for something. They're voting in Acts 14:23. Okay? So the selection of leadership in the church moves from casting lots, which was an Old Testament method of picking leadership, to voting for leadership. Well, what is the change? The change that occurred is that every person, every child of God, every member of the church who has been born again and is within the body of Christ now has the Holy Spirit. So all of us have equal access to what the Lord wants. That's why we believe in congregational decisions in our church. That it's not just a select few spiritual people. We vote on those in our leadership, and we believe that that's how the Lord speaks through the body of Christ, and that's how decisions are made. We don't cast lots for our leaders. We don't throw the dice. We don't have an arm wrestling match. we vote on those leaders, allowing the Spirit-empowered body, the congregation, to select those leaders. Now that's all done with people who are devoted to prayer. So we find people devoted to prayer in order that they might find leaders. Now, so that's the pattern in Acts. Let's see if Paul gives us a command in an epistle. Romans chapter 12, verse 12 says this. Paul, talking to a local church, looks at the church and he commands this: rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer. Same exact word, continue steadfast. I like the English Standard Version says devoted to prayer. Okay? So Paul here in Romans chapter 12 is now commanding the church directly to do what the church was already doing in the book of Acts, to continue or to devote yourselves to prayer. So why is that important? What does that mean for us today as a church when we consider prayer? Well, it means we must be devoted to prayer. It's not just going to happen, right? So by way of application, we must discipline ourselves for prayer or it will not happen. You have to be devoted to prayer. It's not just going to happen. I found in my life that there's so many distractions out there that hurt us from prayer, right? And now we have these little things that fit in our pockets. And right now I have 2 notifications on there that can be distracting me from preaching to you. And these kinds of things can distract us from prayer. So we, like the early church, must be devoted to prayer. Now here's how devoted the early church was. It was so devoted that the apostles rejected doing a work that was a good work, but a work nonetheless that would take them away from the amount of prayer that they thought they should be doing. The work that they wanted to do in the early church that needed to be done was helping widows get food. Isn't that a good thing? Shouldn't that happen? Yes. But the apostles said, the Lord has called us to this ministry of prayer and the Word of God. We need to devote time to it. So we're going to say no to good things so that we can say yes to the best things. So in our lives, I'm afraid we're not always even that high up. We need to learn to say no to bad things so that we can devote ourselves to good things. But in the text, sometimes we're going to need to say no to good things to devote ourselves to the best things. And prayer is certainly one of those things. So we must discipline ourselves for prayer or it will not happen. So here's some practical tips. Number 1, I would say devote a time of day to pray and try to stick to it. Right? It just seems better when you do that. That you have that time carved out. Now, I'm not saying it must be in the morning. I'm not saying it must be right before bed. But it must be. It must happen. And so devote a time to pray. Make a plan of how to remember what to pray for. Maybe a notebook or some kind of list. Here, Rick Apthorpe will like this commercial. We have these prayer sheets on the back shelf, right? Joan emails them to you as well. So take these prayer sheets. That'll help you understand what are some things you can pray for. Now, I don't use a paper and pen notebook. I have a MacBook. And what I have is a list of everyone in this church. It's not just members, it's anyone who ever steps foot through here that I speak to on more than one occasion. And I put your name on there, and I put some things on there that you mention, things that I see you need prayed for, things people ask prayer for. And that's what I use to pray for the members of the church. I have that list on my computer. That list could be in your notebook, it could be on your wall in your prayer closet, whatever the case may be. And lastly, when it comes to this idea of devoting yourselves to prayer, expect that your pastor will need time for prayer. Okay? Realize that needs to be built into my position according to Acts chapter 6, that's a priority in my life. And that at times, there might be some very good things that I might need to not do because I have to do the best thing that God has called me to do. And that is be devoted to the Word of God and prayer. Right, now that doesn't mean I'm perfect and I always use all my time wisely and that I can't be challenged in that area. But just understand that I need some of that time built into my own schedule as a pastor. Well, now let's talk about praying for the church, and let's see how Paul prayed, or how the early church prayed. Just an example of a kind of corporate prayer meeting. Go to Acts chapter 4, starting at verse 24. Acts 4:24. What's happened is Peter and John had preached, and they had even healed a man, and the religious leaders, the Sanhedrin, didn't like that. They threatened them. They tell them to go home and don't preach in the name of Jesus anymore or do any of this work. And Peter and John say, we'd rather obey God than man. So here you have the first example of civil disobedience in the early church. And in that time, they then go back after being persecuted by the leadership of the day. They go back to their church. Verse 23, it says, being let go, they were under arrest. Being let go, they went to their own companions and reported all that the chief priests and the elders had said to them. So when they heard that, they raised their voice to God with one accord and said, so now here's a prayer that's going to come, right? So they lift their voice with one accord and they say this prayer. Think about how many times you've heard prayers like this in prayer meeting. Lord, you who are God, who made the heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them, who by the mouth of your servant David have said, why do the nations rage and the people plot vain things? The kings of the earth take their stand. The rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his Christ. For truly against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate with the Gentiles and the people of Israel were gathered to do whatever your hand and your purpose determined before to be done. Now, Lord, look on their threats and grant to your servants that with all boldness they may speak your word by stretching out your hand to heal and that stop